everyone, and welcome to the Ponderosa Life. My name is Bonnie, and this is my beautiful horse Fabio. And the dogs that you see walking around in the background are Thelma and Delgato. Today is Story Sunday, and I am going to try and tell this story while walking Fabio on the trail. I left you off with the Little House on the Prairie of Laura finished her contract as a school teacher, and Ma was getting to where she was putting her foot down about homesteading. So after Laura finished her contract with the school, it was still winter, and Almanzo then started to date Laura, and he would take her out on sled rides. So Almanzo took Laura on buggy rides. It would be our days cruising, and they did a lot of sled riding because it was still winter in the beginning, and then winter turned to spring, and then they started taking buggy rides, and then at the end of spring they started taking rides in covered wagons. It was covered buggies because it became summer. Long story short, Almanzo and Laura got married. Laura moved in with Almanzo on his homestead as a wife. Now back on Ma and Pa's side of the story, Pa continued working his land, and it was a lot of work for Ma because they never had any sons. So Pa had to hire men to do a lot of the plowing and the harvesting of all of the crops that Pa would grow, wheat and corn and everything. And during the time when Pa would have these hired help people to bring in the crop, Mom would be doing a lot of cooking and cleaning for all of the people that Pa had hired. And so it was a lot of work for Ma, and there wasn't a lot of profit in the homesteading, especially since Pa had to hire on a lot of people to help him do the homesteading work. So Ma put her foot down and told Pa she was done. She was tired of all this homesteading and trying to make it work. And she had followed Pa around for all these years of their marriage, and she was just kind of done. So Pa started building a house in town in DeMint, South Dakota, and it took a couple of years for it to be completed. So as he's building the house in town, they continue doing their homesteading life. Well, then Laura and Almanzo have their first child. Ooh. And it is a baby girl, and Laura names her Rose, and her name was Rose Wilder. And I thought it was kind of funny that when I was looking up Rose Wilder, I never could find a middle name. Well, it turns out they never gave her a middle name. Her middle name was Rose Wilder, and that was it. So they had Rose and continued homesteading. And then, and like I said, I'm not going to know the years, but Almanzo and Laura end up getting really, really sick. And Ma takes in Rose to prevent Rose from getting sick. And so Ma takes care of Rose, and she takes care of her for quite a while. Okay, so I'm not sure when it happened. I can't remember if it was before or after Almanzo and Laura got sick, but I will put it down, or I will put it up so you guys can see it, because I'll edit it in here. But I believe that Laura and Almanzo had a baby boy, before they got sick. But the baby boy, unfortunately, just like Ma and Pa had, they lost their baby boy. And then Almanzo suffered the stroke, and it took a long time, of course, to get better. Ooh, good boy. Good boy. It took him a long time to get better. And Laura and Almanzo were never able to have children. Again, Laura never, ever was able to conceive. He wasn't able to have children after that. So then Pa was pretty much done with the house in town. They moved on 3rd Street in DeSmet, South Dakota. And the homesteading still wasn't going well. They now suffered from drought. And so they really weren't making any profits homesteading. So Almanzo and Laura make their first move as a couple, and they first moved to Florida. But after they got to Florida, and it didn't work out there well for them, so then they moved to Missouri, and I'll put the name of the town on the video. They moved to Missouri, and that, fortunately for Laura, was the very last move that her and Almanzo ever made together. That is where they ended up living the rest of their life. They homesteaded a little bit different in Missouri, and when Almanzo was in South Dakota, he was able to use his Morgan horses, which Fabio is a Morgan, to plow the acres of land to grow the crops. But what he discovered in Missouri is Missouri has a lot of rocks. I mean, a lot of rocks. I used to live in Missouri, and they have a ton of rocks. And what he discovered was the rocks and the ground were too much for the Morgan horses. Woo, good boy, Fabio. He's slowly getting there. He's slowly realizing that it's better for him to stay back than it is to go forward. So anyway, he ended up buying a team of mules when they started their homestead in Missouri to break the ground because it was too much for the Morgans. But he still kept his Morgan horses, and he still bred his Morgan horses and trained his horses for carriage horses or buggy horses or whatnot, riding horses, pleasure horses. And when Fabio saw something in the woods, when Rose was little, she wrote about how there was a pair of foals that were born, and he kept them in the barn. Hey, back. He kept them in the barn, and Rose had gone in there, and Almanzo had caught her being in the barn with the babies, and he scolded her and told her not to do that again, because he had a very specific way of training his horses, and I guess by Rose being in there and playing with the foals, it would disturb how he trained his horses. But anyway, Rose did write about that, Laura wrote about that in her book when they had moved to the Ozarks of Missouri. Laura and Almanzo wrote about how they grew apple trees, and Almanzo built their home in Missouri, and that it was a lot of work and a lot of struggle in the beginning, but eventually they got it, and they were able to create a way of earning money. Rose and Laura have to do a lot of the labor work with Almanzo because of the they didn't have a son either. And unfortunately, when they first moved to Missouri, they didn't have the money to hire anybody. So Laura and Rose had to do a lot of the extra work to help Almanzo, and they started an apple orchard, and they grew apples. And Rose actually told Laura one day that she wishes she was born a boy, because it seemed like the women's work was so much harder than the boys' work, because the boys went outside and they took care of the farm, which Rose enjoyed doing a lot. She enjoyed being outside, and she enjoyed the outdoor work, but she didn't enjoy the house cleaning and the cooking and everything else, the mending and everything else that you had to do as a housewife. And so she actually wrote how she wishes she was a boy. Well, Laura wrote how Rose had said she wishes that she was born a boy, because in that way she would have been able to go outside and help her dad all day and then come in and relax. But instead, Laura and Rose worked just as hard as Almanzo, but then they had to come into the house and still do their housely duties, cook dinner, do dishes afterwards, and then maybe get a couple of hours to relax before going to bed and starting all over again the next day. So that is how Almanzo and Laura spent the remainder of their life. And then Rose, so anyway, before I go into Rose, Mom and Pa still were living in DeMint, South Dakota, and Pa got sick. Don't get ahead of me. Pa got sick, and Laura actually took a train ride by herself to South Dakota to see her father. And Rose was doing all of Laura's housely duties while she was gone to take care of her father. And Pa died shortly after. He died of cardiac arrest. And then Ma, Carrie, Mary, and Grace lived in a house that was on 3rd Street in South Dakota. And then somewhere along the way, Carrie and Grace, they ended up getting married, but they never had any children. And then Ma passed away. I believe it was ammonia. I had read that she passed away from ammonia. And then I do believe that Carrie moved in with Mary, and they were living together until their deaths. And despite the story or the show of Little House on the Prairie, Mary never got married. And Mary was also, anyway, Mary was never a school teacher, and she also never married. So she died single and still living in the house on 3rd Street that Pa had built in South Dakota. So then after that, Rose did a little bit of traveling. She went and stayed at like a cousin's house or something in Louisiana. She was very racy for her time. She would go buggy riding alone with a gentleman, and there was quite the gossip about Rose and this gentleman. And Rose, I do believe, was in love with him, but nothing ever happened between that. And then Rose ended up going back home in the Ozark in Missouri. And then I believe she went to St. Louis, and she got a job in a hotel, and she read the tape for the stock market, and she would tell the guests that were staying in the hotel what the stock market was doing for that day. Rose's life is very, very interesting. she was a woman of empowerment way before her time. She wore clothes with short sleeves. She wore very revealing clothes. She became a real estate agent in San Francisco. Rose did get married. She married a gentleman. She got pregnant. But unfortunately, she had a really, really bad miscarriage that left her unable to ever get pregnant again. So there were no children. There were no heirs of the Ingalls after Laura, Grace, Carrie, and Mary. That was it. There was no more. Nobody else had any children. Well, I mean, Rose was born, but after Rose, that was it. There were no more children of this immediate Ingalls family. Rose ended up getting divorced from her husband, which was very bad during this time. She hid it from her parents for 7 years. She did not tell them that she was separated from her husband. She even continued living with her husband to hide it from her parents that she had gotten divorced. I love Rose's story. I may tell Rose's story, but I really want to end the Little House on the Prairie with this episode. So anyway, maybe in the future I'll do a Rose story, but I don't know. So anyway, Rose ended up going back home after she, told her parents that, yeah, she was divorced. She ended up moving back home. She did a lot of adventurous things between times. But anyway, she ended up moving back home. And when Laura was 60 years old, so whatever age you are, it is never too late to do something that you've always dreamed of. It is never too late to let your light shine, because Laura was 60 years old before her first book was wrote. And I'm not even positively sure what age she was when the book was actually published, when the Little House on the Prairie books began. Almanzo died first in Missouri, and then Laura died after Almanzo, and then Rose, continued to live out her life, and she ended up passing away as well. I believe she was in her 80s, and so they lived a very long life. I will put the dates on the screen just to make sure. But anyway, that is the story of the Little House on the Prairie. And I just dig into it. Look and see all the things that I missed. Tell me what I got wrong, because I guarantee you I did. I have a terrible memory about things. I just love stories, and I love learning about people from the past and what they did. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will talk to you again next time. Bye!